Hello and welcome to the Fresh Perspectives podcast, where our intention is growing together and leading with love. I'm Peter Callahan, and I believe we each have incredible capacity to continue to learn and evolve as individuals and as a species, and bring way more love and a lot less fear into the world and our daily lives. Changing can be hard, and I've found that even if nothing changes, having the courage to see our challenges from a fresh perspective can change everything. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm so glad to have my good friend Tim Tynan back on the show with us. You may have heard our last conversation where we went pretty deep and existential on maybe some of the challenges with our world today. And I wanted to bring Tim back on as part of our main intention was to really talk about the work that he does. So I really want to share with you just some of the healing modalities that are out there and something that's worked really well for me and a lot of other people, this work of structural energetic therapy. So you may have heard his bio before, but really this is what Tim focuses on, is the somatic relationship between our body, our emotions, our consciousness. And he uses this really intentional body work to help clients access parts of themselves that have been unconscious or just really lead into a lot of chronic pain, as you hear us talk about. But in this conversation, we really just get into the nuts and bolts of structural energetic therapy and the definition, some of the origins, and really talking through many of the issues that we can all encounter in our lives around chronic pain, tensions. What he speaks to is really interesting, this spiral twist that most of us seem to be born with, or as it's called, core distortion. So we'll explain what that is, what to expect in a structural energetic therapy session. There's a combination of cranial sacral, acupressure, and a deeper form of massage, basically. So I'm really excited to bring you in. Come join in the conversation, and thanks so much for being here. Awesome. Well, welcome back to the podcast. It is my first welcome back. I'm glad to have you for the hopefully second of many more.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It was fun the first time, and obviously we had a lot to talk about. So we'll see how much I can get back on my soapbox and see how much people want to receive it.
Understood. Well, I've gotten great feedback from that conversation. And I know a big part of our intention today, as we honestly referenced in our first conversation, was about getting back maybe to the bit more concrete and the tangible. What are the nuts and bolts of structural energetic therapy, and how is it different than massage?
Obviously, last time, I kind of went off into the more etheric ideas around it, but today, really just wanted to touch in. It's very much a physical experience as well, and not everybody's going to go to that place that we discussed last time. It doesn't mean that it's better or worse if you didn't go there, but I also want to touch on the fact that you don't have to go there. It could be a physical experience. So really at its core, structural energetic therapy it's a really beautiful kind of collection of really advanced manual therapies, some of which include myofascial restructuring, cranial structural therapy, which is unique to SET, and it was actually created specifically for SETs. We use acupressure, we use breath work, and all of which is geared towards essentially unwinding the body and restructuring your body to a place where it's in balance and in homeostasis. Very often when we've had chronic injuries and chronic pain, it's the culmination of years of compensation over and over to the point where the body just says, I can't do this anymore, and starts to scream. And structural energetic therapy is essentially the unwinding of all those compensations back to the point where your body can maintain structural balance and strength.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, that unwinding or coming back and reconnecting. So it sounds like there's a lot of different aspects to SET, right? So massage therapy, where you started, I just feel like there's a simplicity to massage while it's also like a deep connecting modality, and lots of people do it. There's lots of different ways to do it, but it sounds like there's so much more around structural energetic therapy. What am I missing there?
So the best way I've kind of learned to explain is let's say, you come in with, neck pain, for instance. The way we would look at it, because when we do soft tissue work, we're doing, when we say myofascial restructuring, essentially that's the idea that the body when pain arises in a single area, it's not just because of tension in that one specific area. It's because of a pattern of compensation that starts from the feet all the way to the top of the head. So essentially, again, if you're coming in with neck pain, it might be starting in your feet or your legs or your pelvis. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a step back and then see that the structure as a whole, see where it's starting from, and then working your way up from there. So, if you come to neck pain, I may start working on your abdominals. I may start working on your chest and, on different parts of your legs, and all of which is geared towards building strength underneath that area that you have weakness, which is eventually manifesting pain versus just, I have some tension. I have a knot in my shoulder. I'm just going to work that out. We're coming more from the perspective, how can we take the pressure off of that knot in the shoulder and then work to that area after the compensation that area is dealing with has been released, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I think so. And let's come back to this, see where it's starting from, to the root of these, because I'm curious to understand that a little bit more, but staying with right now more tactically what we're doing, and maybe it makes sense to go into now too, Tim, is what are the challenges that you hear most? And I'm happy to share, my experience of working with you. But basically I was having a lot of pain in my shoulders and upper back. And this was before I was rocking small children to sleep for hours a day. So that is only,
That will definitely have something about it. Yeah.
There's a great Bluey episode, by the way, where the dad's sitting on a yoga ball in front of his computer for work. And Bluey is out of Australia. It's this great short kids show.
We just started watching it actually like last week. So I actually caught up with you. I wouldn't have been last week, but now we are.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But there's this one simple scene where he's sitting on a yoga ball and his kids are, Bluey and Bingo, are asking like, Dad, why do you sit on that weird ball every day from work? And he says it better than I ever could in the Australian accent, but he's like, well, it wrecked me back changing it in nappies. They say for diapers, but basically like, it's because of parenting, this dad is sitting on a yoga ball. And
nothing like guilt induction. Because you exist, my body hurts.
Exactly.
So like you had touched on like why you had originally come in, for instance. And I think people, and you were asking about why would people find you? Like, what is it that would, sure, there's neck pain, sure, there's back pain, but sometimes people just because, for instance, I have people who do yoga and they feel resistance. They feel something's off in their structure in their body. Their posture feels off. It doesn't always have to be pain. Generally it's pain, but also people who are like, for instance, I have people who are, they're in the gym and they want to increase strength. If your body is not in structural balance, as you bring in structural balance, your strength increases. It's the same with athletes who are looking for, increased performance. It sounds crazy, but people find that they might be able to run a little bit faster. They might be able to jump a little bit higher. They might be able to lift things a little bit heavier because now you have more access to your whole body and all your muscles are working in unison versus working against each other.
Interesting. Really interesting. Wow. So really healing and even enhancing to some degree,
Yes.
like optimizing rather than just fixing per se. So and I'm just trying to think of, so the people who tend to benefit the most from this work, I guess. So we'll get into more of the how and the what you're doing.
Okay.
But staying with the why for a little bit, who have you found has really shared the best, most positive feedback? Like, wow, this has really made a big difference. I'm just wondering if there's some examples that come to mind.
Yeah, generally, the people, especially the people who are in pain that usually find me are the people who they've been, and I'm going to name a few different professions, not to disparage them, but just as examples, they've been to chiropractic, they've been to PT, they've even thought about surgery, they've done other types of massage, they've done acupuncture, and they're like, well, I've tried everything and I'm still in pain. I'm going to try you. And, a lot of times people come in, they have no idea what I do or how I do it. They're just like, well, someone told me to come to you because you can bring benefit. And generally those are the people who've had the most benefit and the most extreme sessions because they're afterwards like, oh my God, I've done X, Y, and Z and I no longer have pain after this. And I don't know if we want to get into nuts and bolts about this right now, but the thing that, for lack of a better term, set apart, no pun intended, is within our mindset, and there's within the mindset of a few different other modalities, our bodies are essentially born into a structural imbalance. So the moment you are born, you're actually born into essentially a spiral twist within your body structure. within our language, we call that the core distortion. And essentially the way that manifests is that there's this imbalance in the hips where the left hip is kind of pulling forward, the right hip kind of pulls back. That kind of tends to spiral up your spine, which is actually, from our opinion, the origin of scoliosis is this underlying imbalance in the spine. Yeah. So there's this weakness in the foundation. So then the spine doesn't have this strength to build off of. And technically we all have a degree of curvature in the spine. We just don't call it scoliosis until it's a certain degree of curvature. And that will wind its way all up into your shoulders, into your neck, into your head. And what we do differently in structural energetic therapy is that we actually address that underlying twist. There's a couple of there's a chiropractic modality called SOT chiropractic. Even in craniosacral therapy, they acknowledge this twist. We are just the only therapy that actually addresses that twist the way we do, which is actually through releasing that twist in the cranial bones, because your cranial bones actually mirror your pelvis. So that same twist that we see in the pelvis, which your left hip kind of rotates forward, right kind of pulls back, is mirrored in the relationship with the cranial bones. Specifically in the relationship, and this might, not to get too into the weeds, but specifically in the relationship between the sphenoid bone, which is the bone right in here, and the occiput, which is the one in the back right here. And they come down and meet right at the base of the skull. And when that twist is released, it releases this chain reaction throughout the entire body where the pelvis essentially unlocks itself. And then when we go and do soft tissue work, it's all done to follow this kind of already opened unwinding process that's happening in the body. But if we don't do soft tissue work, that unwinding that already took place from the cranial bones is going to hit resistance at some point. Because since you were born into that twist, you've developed your compensation patterns, your repetitive motions. You've lived in that twist. So the tension in your muscles and your soft tissue is within that twist. So even though we unwound it from the core, there's still resistance in the soft tissue. So that's where we have to go into the soft tissue to kind of follow that. And the reason why a lot of people, at least from the feedback I've gotten, that it seems more effective for some people is that we're following the body where it wants to go. I'm not forcing the body into any position. I'm not pushing the body anywhere. I'm allowing space for the body to go back where it wants, because the body wants to be in balance and homeostasis. Sometimes there's just resistance there. And we help just move it in that direction. So very often people will get up after a session. They're like, whoa, I feel so grounded. And you may have experienced this before too, where like your feet just feel super planted on the ground. You feel very connected to your legs. It's because you've never actually experienced your body in that way, because you've always been stuck in this literal twist in your body. And once that's released, your body's like, oh, this is what it's meant to feel like. Yeah. And then we can get into the weeds a little bit more about subsequent sessions. Your body will unwind from there, but that's essentially the core of it. We're unwinding this underlying core distortion pattern and then releasing the soft tissue to follow that underlying release that we did with the cranial bones.
Amazing, Tim. Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yes, I'm feeling it in my body as we're talking about it. It's been a while since my last session, and I can almost, I don't know if I'm just creating it in my mind, but all of me wants to be unwound more. Like I definitely, after experiencing it many times now, to what degree do we ever just fully align and stay there? Does this need constant maintenance?
Yes and a no. So there's two ways you have to look at this, because obviously we're still living. So the idea is, how can we release all of the patterns that you've built up over the years, as much of them as possible, from all the injuries you've had, all the different, if you've been sitting at a desk for a long time, if you've been doing that motion, or you played sports, you did a specific, we have to release all those underlying patterns. We can get you to a point where you're in the present moment with what your body's dealing with now, but we're still living. So, you're going to go on a plane ride for, 3 hours. You're going to get into a car. You're going to be playing with your daughter. You might be holding her on your shoulder for a long time. So you're going to keep falling back into patterns. The difference is eventually getting to a point where you're just dealing with whatever pattern you're in the present moment, versus dealing with compensation from when you fell off your bike when you were 6. Right. That's the idea. We can get you, how do we get your body and your structure to as present as possible and not dealing with stuff from your past?
Interesting.
And that's where it bleeds into all the stuff we talked about last time, because all those patterns from your past also have the emotional stuff that's attached to it, which we got into last.
And it's making me think of mindfulness-based stress reduction. 40 years ago, John Kabat-Zinn created an 8-week protocol, right? So he turned this fluffy mindfulness topic into a repeatable 8-week protocol that eventually the doctors at UMass Medical Center were sending John Kabat-Zinn their patients because they couldn't figure out what was going on. And he was having them relate to their pain in a different way. It wasn't even necessarily removing the pain,
Right.
just changing how we're relating to it and just having a different. So to me, the set is something very similar where 40 years ago, like sitting and meditating, you were weird. Like you were on the full hippie spectrum. And like, that was just like, okay, whatever you need to do, but then it was prescribed. You were referred by your doctor to go sit and follow your breath. And as weird as that felt, it seemed to help a lot of people. And the connection of the course helps a lot. And so to me, there's just an analogy here for structural energetic therapy as well. It's like, if we can acknowledge like, yeah, I was born with a core distortion, probably more than one for my case. I'm not sure how that's again with the historical thing, but understanding like it's okay not to feel okay. And I often think about how easy it is to give up to, right? We've seen one Western medical doctor, maybe we've gone to a naturopath, we went to see the acupuncturist, we did chiropractic. And I've had like, maybe we tried 3 or 4 different things. We didn't just stop at the second opinion where they said, yeah, we don't know either. But it can be exhausting to keep going and keep trying. So I'm curious how what comes up for you thinking of all the folks who are like, yeah, I've tried everything else. Like how's this going to work?
Well, I can only come from my own experience on that, dealing with my own chronic health issues. I think I've been fired by 5, 6 different GI doctors for pushing back. I've seen 10, 15 different naturopathic doctors, all dealing with my Crohn's disease.
Wow.
And one thing that always stuck with me is like, after every single time where like I tried it and it didn't really stick, it didn't really work, I'm like, all right, what's next? Like, because I always felt in my being like everything is repairable. And maybe it's not, but at least in my view, I'm going to come from that perspective because it at least keeps you open. It's coming from the place of I surrender into what's happening, but I'm also not giving up. I find often what happens is, especially those people who come to my office who have been to a lot of different practitioners, very often they'll come in with their diagnosis. I see this often with people who they have a herniated disc, for instance. And they're like, well, I have back pain but I have a herniated disc, so it's not going to get better. And I'm like, well, maybe not. What if we just left that diagnosis you have at the door for a moment and we just stay with your symptoms? You have back pain. Okay. If that back pain eventually isn't there and you go to get an MRI and there's a herniated disc, but you don't have back pain, who cares? This very often they'll have the diagnosis, they have no cartilage in their knee. Okay. So people come in, they have the preconceived notion that I'm always going to have knee pain. Okay. Well, what if we left this diagnosis? Okay. You have this understood thing that if you have this, that's it. You're done. End of story. You got to deal with this rest of your life.
There's a problem.
Right. It's like, well, maybe not. And very often the same thing. It's like, well, what if we got rid of your knee pain? Who cares what shows up on your scans? I can understand, but if you're not experiencing it as pain, who cares? And then we get into the weeds more about what no cartilage means. As again, that's a different rabbit hole we another day. But very often these diagnoses that we get along our path actually lock us into a perceived outcome. So the more we can come in from this place of, again, not working against your condition like we talked about last time, it's surrendering into what's happening, but also staying open to new possibility. Be here with what is and stay open to any potential outcome that can come after that.
Absolutely, Tim. I love that so much. I mean, to me, it's a great description of really what I mean by fresh perspectives.
Yeah.
Just staying open. It's not ignoring the current reality and our current experience. In fact, it's the opposite. I think validating and acknowledging what we are currently experiencing rather than looking at an EKG or an X-ray and be like, well, no, you don't have that. Well, what hurts? I don't know what to tell you, doc, but I am experiencing pain, right? It's like we get the opposite sometimes from Western medicine.
Yeah.
Even with kids, everything's normal. Well, they're suffering. Do you think you could try something else? Like there is suffering occurring, I'm like, well, everything looks normal.
And that goes back to, at least that's how SET is always taught to me. And, it's something I like to talk to. I was talking about Don McCann. Don McCann is the person who actually created structural energetic therapy. But the way he always taught it to us with what you're kind of saying, it's like, how many of us are told, this can't get better. right? And his whole thing and why he even created Set to begin with was because he stayed open. He just had this perspective of like, well, that's interesting. Let's try this. And Set essentially became Set over the course of 45 years of this man's journey of trying different things and putting things together, working with chiropractors, working with neurologists, working with PTs, and just seeing what works, seeing what different, and getting feedback from the clients and saying, okay, do you feel better? No. Do you feel better? Yes. And it's like, okay. And then it kind of morphed into this thing, which we now call structural energetic therapy, but it doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be forever. There are going to be new discoveries that happen. And, now it's actually being taken over by, trainings are actually being taken over by one of my really good friends. He's taking over for Don, and he has a much different perspective on function, on different perspectives on energy. So now it's even starting to morph a little bit differently and adding different stuff in. So even the work as a whole comes from that perspective of, okay, this is what it is in in the flesh right now, and how can we continue to improve and evolve? It's not a done deal. It's just that's where we are now, and there's openness to grow later on.
Absolutely. Would it be safe to say it's not set in stone?
Hey.
Sorry, I heard you almost say set, so I had the dad joke need to come in. But
But
absolutely, what comes up in me is this, like, it feels very antithetical, whether intentionally or not, to this Western medicine. Like, you went to med school, here are the textbooks. It feels like it takes such a long time. I experienced this with a pediatrician. We're like, no, the American Association of Pediatrics says differently than what you just told me. We were just reading it before we came, and he was just adamant about this certain way. And I'm like, there's a lot of research around continuing education for medical professionals in general. And to me, there's just a much more authentic approach, but I wonder for some, it can lack credibility or something, right? If there isn't that openness and that, like, what do you mean you're iterating? You got to figure out what works and keep doing it so that you can know that you're helping. And there's to me, the subjectivity or just a humility of, we don't have all the answers. We're doing our best. We found a lot of things that work. And I can't know, is how I approach coaching, exactly what's going to work best for you. All we can do is experiment and try. And I'm going to both show up. I like this term, authentic attunement. I'm going to be myself and use the knowledge that I'm bringing to the table. And I'm going to stay open and curious and try and receive whatever feedback you give me, explicitly or inexplicitly, unexplicitly, explicitly or not, subconsciously. Like, all right, I feel like I'm always trying to ask him, as I feel from you, how are you? What do you really need right now? What do you really, like, what else? What can we try? So I really feel that from you. And to me, it builds a lot of trust.
And we've talked about this in the past, where the place where new perspectives, fresh perspectives can come from is in I don't know. I don't know is the most profound place to be. The issue with that, though, it means you have to put aside your ego. You have to put aside that part of you that's like, well, yeah, this is what it's going to be. And this is how it is. And it's like, if we as medicine approached each patient, each client that way, from this place of I don't know, not saying we don't bring in, like you said, the wisdom and the knowledge of where we came from, but then staying open to, okay, this is how things worked up until this point. Let's try this. And also, I don't know if it's going to work. I'm going to try it. We're going to see if this works. I have a very strong intuition that it will, because it has in the past, based off of pattern recognition. Doesn't belittle your credibility from all these years of experience. But if you can stay in that place of I don't know and stay open, because each person's different. I can have 10 people come in with low back pain and 10 different reasons why low back pain is there. And if I try to superimpose the session that was beneficial for the back pain that came in before that, the next person, I might not fully get to what's going on with that person. I may cause more harm, or I may not get to it and that person may not come back because they didn't get relief. It's, okay, this worked for this previous person. I'm going to see what could work for you on that, and then stay open to, okay, maybe you need this, and then maybe you need this. That I don't know is where new discoveries come in. That's where paradigms get shifted. That's where things change. That's where I think there's a big issue in our medical fields from firsthand knowledge of experiencing it. Was everyone's like, well, no, diet supplementation doesn't work for Crohn's. Lifestyle change doesn't work for Crohn's. Stress management doesn't work for Crohn's. Homeopathics don't work for Crohn's. And it's like, maybe I'll try it. And God, it did work because, I stayed in this place of like, I wasn't sure and I tried it and it worked.
And you tried a lot of
Yeah.
things before you found a combination that has, and I hate to say it, has worked so far.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And with that, even with what I'm doing now, there's been bumps in the road. And with the practitioner I'm working with, her whole thing is staying open. She's like, oh, okay, well, now we took a little left here. Okay, now let's go back over here. It's being able to stay open is what's allowed the healing process to take place. It lets the body start to talk. It lets the body start to open up, because if all I have in my mind is it needs to be this and the body's saying that, well, I'm not going to see that because I need to see this. And that's how it also works at least in our perspective in body work. It's like, yes, we have a preconceived list of protocols and techniques that we do, and we apply them to each person and allow for the openness and for the individuality for each client based off of what they come in with.
Exactly.
And we all have that as a collective as well. We have collective shared experiences, collective shared traumas and traditions and cultures. And then we have individuality within that. It's the ability to recognize the shared experiences and then the individual experiences.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
Makes sense. All right. So let's go back.
Yeah.
We'll get to sort of what to expect with subsequent sessions and going forward, but
Yeah.
maybe just paint the picture for an initial session, like what to expect when you walk in the room, whether it's obviously you have your approach, and then there's not too many other right now, especially depending on where you are in the country, right? Structural energetic therapy practitioners, but what should someone expect if they say, all right, you know what? I want to try this. I want to keep seeing how I can feel better in my body. Let's give it a shot. What to expect when they come in the first time?
One thing I maybe do a little bit differently than most people is I do like to spend, some time connecting first before I even start doing anything else. I really like to try, and especially for people who have gone through all the different practitioners, all different modalities, they're coming. I really try to, we talked about before, just really kind of deprogram a lot of these mental prisons that we have about our condition. So that's something I try to do first. And then what everybody will do first is we'll have you actually stand up and we'll actually see what your posture is. How does your body structure itself? Yes, we all have this underlying twist within us that we have in the collective, the shared experience we have, but then we're going to stand you up to see, okay, how have you specifically compensated for this? How is your body structure compensate for this underlying twist in your body? Maybe some people might have added more strength on one side of their body. Maybe one person has, pulled their hip off to one, we're going to see exactly how your body is compensated for that. And then once we kind of get that idea, then it will get you on the table. And then I'll do muscle testing. And muscle testing is used to essentially kind of confirm the things that I was seeing when we were body reading. Because sometimes you can visualize things, but then we're going to do muscle testing to ask the body, okay, what's going on here? I want to muscle test and see, okay, where do you need work today? What's going on? Then we'll get into the cranial structural work. We'll test for this specifically, but almost every single person who gets on my table gets what we call a core distortion release. And that's the cranial releases for that underlying twist in the body. There are a few people who can't receive that if they've had years of degeneration, if they've had hardware in the body. So if you've had a lot of spinal fusions, you have rods in your back, you've got stenosis, things like that. There are ways we can test to see if the core distortion may cause you more pain because you're almost essentially locked into that twist. But if you can receive it, everybody gets the core distortion release. And what that's doing is it's starting the process. It's greasing the wheels for the body to start to open up. And then once we receive that, I'll usually do some acupressure. And what acupressure helps to do is it helps to just bring the body into this state of parasympathetic. You come into my office, you're coming in from, you got off the phone, you fight with your wife, you are dealing with the kids, you're coming from work, you're up here. And especially before we start to do body work, I like to bring the people, let's bring your vagal response down. Let's get you to a point where you're a little more present and I don't want to say calm, but you're just at a little more peace in your body. And it's almost like it's a time for me also to almost kind of connect with your body before we start to do soft tissue work. It's a chance for me to really feel into it. Okay, I might have muscle tested, I might have done a couple of things to see what we should do, but I'm going to check in with your body. What should we do today? It kind of giving me a chance to feel into that. And then after we do that, then we'll get into soft tissue work. And then whatever soft tissue work we decide to do is geared towards where areas of pain are and also what's going to get you the most benefit to maintain no pain for as long as possible. If someone comes in with neck pain, I want to make sure you get some work on your neck because that's where you're feeling pain. But we also may need to address something in the lower body that is going to is causing the chain reaction of compensation that is causing this pain in the neck. So it's it's how to dance both of that, how to address the area that you're feeling pain today, and also what areas you need to address that is gonna maintain that for as long as possible. And I find that's actually what really makes SET unique, is because there are other myofascial restructuring modalities out there. The difference with SET is with other modalities, if let's say you came in with neck pain, they have a preconceived set of protocols where they may have to start in your feet, and it might not be until session 8 that they get to your neck. And it's very, and as you can imagine, if you have someone who's severe neck pain, it's very hard to continue to come back for sessions, be like, well, why do you keep working on my feet but my neck hurts, right? What SET is unique about is that since we do unravel this underlying core distortion pattern, that itself is addressing the entire body structure. And that brings weight bearing support to the whole body, that if you came in with neck pain in that session, you know what, we only had time to just address your neck. The core distortion release is going to bring the balance to the lower body that's going to support the work up top. Sure, it might be beneficial to do soft tissue work in there, but if we don't have time to do it, we only have time to address the neck and the soft tissue work, you're still getting the most possible support in the lower body that you could because you did the core distortion release. That other modalities, they may not have that access to those techniques that we have.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you. And then I know you also end with, as a last step, so we'll go back through in a moment, but then the last step is to then assess the body and you kind of compare. I love this part because I try to feel into my own body. Like, how does it feel? And it always feels better and different and subtle in some ways and really obvious in others, at least for myself. So then you wrap up with that piece, right?
Yeah. So after we do soft tissue work, then after the session finishes, we'll actually have you stand up again. We'll body read you again and see how things changed. And what I do a little bit differently than other practitioners maybe is when we do body reading initially is I really take time to have the person really feel into their body structure versus me just kind of verbalize to you what I'm seeing. Because one thing I know is that a lot of times people can't feel it. You know, I can see, hey, you might be favoring your right leg, you know, your right hip may be kind of jutting out, you know, might be pushing off to the side, your left shoulder might be pulling down, but they can't feel that. So I really take the time to kind of do an embodiment exercise when they're standing so that they can feel it. So that later on, when they stand up after the session, they can feel the change. Because I noticed very often people, you know, when I wasn't doing this, they would get up, they would look so in balance and so aligned. And I would say, wow, like you look so much more in balance, and they don't feel any change. And my thing, and I was like, well, who cares what I see? You know, I'm not the one who has to walk out the door with that body. I want to make sure that we take the time and that person feels the change in their body. They can actually be in their body, because at that point, then people are actually more connected to the healing process versus just me telling them, okay, this is happening. I want somebody to be like, yes, okay, I can feel that my right hip is slowly starting to come back into balance. I'm feeling my shoulders are starting to come back into equal heights. I'm feeling my neck start to, you know, straighten itself back out again. That's way more important to me than me saying, oh, look, your neck is straighter. Because what does somebody do with that if they can't feel that?
Yes, feeling is believing, if you will. And
I
think it could be challenging, certainly for me as like a straight male in our culture who was, I feel like, subliminally taught to completely ignore my body, rub some dirt on it. Every coach that I had in sports, ignore it, just keep pushing through, as opposed to slow down and connect so that we can, feel into what's useful and what's not. Is this helping or is it not? So important. It's such a gift that you offer, Tim. There's a humility to that, and like the connection, like you said. So you start with connection. It sounds like you really end with connection, both for the person and themselves, as well as you and them as their practitioner.
A lot of that came from my own experience doing my own healing. I felt for a long time very disconnected to the healing process. Like I was giving my power away to somebody else to do it for me. And I didn't feel as embodied into the experience. I was like, well, how can I bring that into these sessions where people feel just as involved in it versus me just doing it to them? It has a much different quality to it. At least I experience it that way.
Awesome. So you start with this connection. We do the assessment, so the body read, do some muscle testing, which is what, just for people who don't know, maybe you don't know what muscle testing is.
So essentially what you're doing is you're singling out a specific muscle. In this case, we single out the right posterior deltoid. and you can introduce, essentially, you can ask questions, and you're essentially asking the underlying, I guess some people call it the subconscious, or the higher self. There's this kind of underlying intelligence in the body. And when you ask certain questions, you'll notice that that muscle can maintain stable on its own, or when you kind of give some pressure down, or you'll notice that the body has to grab other muscles because there's a weakness in that muscle at that point. So it's essentially asking yes and no questions to the body. So if there's a yes, that muscle can maintain strength and stability on its own. And if there's a no, either that muscle, that arm will go weak, or what tends to happen is because a lot of us, if our body goes weak, we'll kind of bring other muscle groups in to keep it maintain strength. So sometimes you'll notice like all of a sudden someone's bicep or someone's anterior deltoid or lateral deltoid will also come in to keep that arm up because that posterior deltoid has now gone weak. And that's essentially asking the body yes and no questions to figure out what it needs and what's going on.
Awesome. I love this part because you are trying to ask and not just like you said before, saying, well, I'm the expert. I've got the training. I know what you need. You're
Right.
really checking in with the person. And to be honest, Tim, there's a part of me, because I've done muscle testing with a naturopath before in other situations too. And it brings up some skepticism in a part of me.
Yeah.
It's just like, so you're asking my subconscious and it's responding back and I have no awareness of this. Other than I can definitely feel when my arm is sort of either withstanding or not. There's a degree of real trust, especially with something that doesn't have maybe what we were talking about before, all this clearly defined evidence-based, which I have so much skepticism around also that it feels irrelevant to me. That's why I can easily open to these things, because I'm like, it's all just humans making shit up. This is just a form of doing so that it just feels more in integrity and authentic to me, and like without this like, oh no, I know for sure. But it's like, I'm just opening and trying to ask and seeing what responses I get back. Do you have anything else that comes to mind though to speak to the skepticism?
Yeah, because along with you, I've been to multiple naturopaths who did muscle testing for different supplements and things like that. And some things worked and some things didn't. I find, I'm very specific about how I do muscle testing because I really believe you can get in trouble with it. I think, I know some people who use it predicting the future. I use it mainly for physical things. I also don't mainly just rely on that. I'm using a series of analysis. I'm using muscle testing. I'm using the body reading. I'm also feeling in my hands. Like, what am I feeling on the table? And there are times where not everyone muscle tests very clear. So there are times I'll muscle test somebody, they're just like, they're muffling the whole time and I can't really get a clear test. So I'm going to rely more on what I saw visually. Or there may be times that, maybe somebody couldn't really tell what was going on visually, had an idea, and I muscle tested and I couldn't really get an idea. I may then trust my intuition more. Like there's multiple ways to analyze people. And I don't think there's any one technique that I like. I do have a healthy skepticism of muscle testing as well. I use it, but I also don't think it's the end all be all. I think you get in trouble with any analysis that this is the way it is, right? It's again, going back to the, I don't know. Okay. This is what's worked for me in the past, and staying open to, okay, this may not be what's perfect for this person right now.
Totally. It's another form of data collection. Like, I love what you're saying. There's multiple ways to assess, and this is just one other tool that you use that sometimes can be extremely useful and clarifying, and other times is foggy. Just like any body of research, this was a double-blind controlled trial, and it still killed a lot of people who then took the FDA approved medication. There's no guarantees, and I love that. I love your humility with it, and again, the openness. This is what I help so many clients with: is like, let's run some experiments. I've got some things that have definitely worked for me. I am doing my best to work with this overconfidence that I know what works. Like, this is going to be it. Maybe only you can know.
It's literally always new potential, new discoveries are in I don't know. And the mind and the ego hates I don't know, because the mind and the ego is the part of you that thinks, well, I got it all figured out. Like, well, okay. But we obviously don't, because we're not doing everything perfectly yet. So
yeah, we're not going to go into the underlying societal trends that I see line up with that perfectly, Tim. We touched on some of those, and we'll get back to it if we hear enough interest. Maybe we'll dive more into our thoughts there. But
something I did want to touch on, and I don't know, where this could fit in, but I find that kind of explaining a little bit Don's story. It does a really beautiful job of kind of explaining what SET is today. And like where he discovered that, and kind of just explain how like, the progression of additions and subtractions to what we do and how we ended up where we are today. Because Don actually started his career as a psychotherapist. And he did a lot of work, and this was back in the 60s, and things like rebirthing and gestalt therapy and all these different types of breath work therapies were coming in. And very quickly, he started to notice the relationship between the mind and the body. So coming from that psychological perspective, he then he went to school for massage therapy because he started working the mind-body connection. And around that time in California, there were new techniques being discovered in myofascial restructuring called structural integration therapy. And at that time in the 60s, this was the most advanced body work that was coming out. So he went out and he learned structural integration therapy. And structural integration is the same idea we have, where when you have pain in the body, it's not just in one single area. It's this idea you have to clear this whole pattern in the body. And some people might be listening might have heard of things like Rolfing. Rolfing is a specific technique that comes out of structural integration therapy. Again, this idea of clearing these whole patterns in the body, not just working in one specific area. So Don learned structural integration therapy. And within that, that's what I was alluding to before, where you do this 10-session protocol where you come in with neck pain, you're going to work from the feet, you work your way up. And Don saw that helped. But what happened after that 10-session protocol is a lot of times people kept falling back into their initial patterns that they came in with. So that's where he's like, oh, okay, maybe I'll start looking into what's this underlying pattern. And that's when he got introduced and started working in what's called SOT chiropractic. And they recognize this twist in the pelvis, this underlying twist. What they do, though, is they use blocks, and they'll put blocks on the hips, bring the pelvis back into balance. So Don started to do that and then took the structural integration work and added that to the blocking. And what he found was that people would maintain for much longer. But again, they started to come back. So he's like, okay, that's where he got introduced to another chiropractor who was looking into cranial osteopathy and looking at the relationship between the cranial bones and the pelvis. And just like they did with the blocking, they tried to address this twist they found in the pelvis. Instead of using blocking, they saw it mirrored in the cranial bones, because the wings of your sphenoid actually relate to your ASISs. Your ASISs are those 2 points on the front of your hips that you can feel, those 2 bony prominences. And then your occiput relate to your PSISs. You can feel those like on the back, those 2 points that stick out the back. So that same twist they saw in the pelvis, where the left is kind of rotating forward, the right's kind of pulling back. They saw the relationship with those same cranial bones. So that's when they started to play around with that. And they were like, okay, how can we release this? And there was a chiropractor, his name is Dallas Hancock, and he and Don created the core torsion together. So then he took this new thing that they kind of created, which was the core torsion release. And then they added that with the structural integration work. And then they saw that, oh my God, people didn't fall back into their previous patterns. The core torsion essentially unlocked the body so they can build into new possibilities. Now they were getting into places that no one had ever been before because no one had released this underlying core torsion pattern. And then Don started to bring in other things along the way that he had learned, like little things here and there, different cranial structural techniques that he created specifically around detoxing the brain. He brought in some more acupressure. He brought in specific breathwork techniques that he had developed way back when he was a psychologist to where it is now, which is kind of this amalgam of all these different things brought together. And in the past couple of years, Don had gone to a conference for, I believe it's called the ACIM. It's a collection of kind of forward-thinking osteopaths, medical doctors, dentists, PTs, things like that, and spoke at this conference. And after he spoke, the old school osteopaths who still practice cranial osteopathy, they got up and gave him this massive round of applause. And one of them spoke up and they were like, do you realize what you did? You just rewrote the book. What you discovered is what we've been trying to work on for centuries. Cranial osteopathy has its genesis in the early 1900s, even late 1800s. And they were blown away. They're like, you just rewrote the book. In 20 years, when we rewrite the textbooks on cranial osteopathy, what you discovered with Dr. Hancock is going to be in the first chapter. And that's where we are today. And now it's slowly moving into where we could potentially add in more down the road. But that's how we got to where we are today.
Wow. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, that is inspiring to hear. And again, not a linear, all right, here's a problem, I'm going to come up with the solution, more of like a test experiment, get feedback, see how it works, and really get that validation from other professionals as well. If you kind of see that you're building on the existing knowledge and adding in new awareness, that sounds like it has more than enough evidence and, outcomes. The efficacy is there from enough people. I can add myself into that. They're like, oh yeah, this is strange and different. Just like putting a pill into your mouth and swallowing it and having that help you feel better used to be. Everything is a a risk of some sort of an experiment. Like, all right,
Right.
let me see. And it's making me wonder, like, are there any risks, or are there any fears come up for me about putting new things into my body, let alone trying new things? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Kind of, I touched on it before, is that, yeah, some people cannot receive a cortisone release. And that's something that we address when we train people, is that you have to test for that, because some people, whether it's from surgeries and injuries, they have just fallen so far within that if we then release that, it's actually to cause more pain. Now, those people, sometimes, most of the time, you can do a series of soft tissue sections and then go back to do the cortisone release to get their body to get caught up to it. But some people can't. And yeah, the soft tissue work that we do, and you may attest to this, can be intense. There are points that we're working on parts of the body that have been chronically holding for years, if not your entire life, because you were born with cord distortion. So yeah, you need to have a therapist who is highly trained, because there are parts of the body that if you're not doing it correct, you can hurt people. So yeah, there has to be a level of presence, a level of focus, a level of skill to do these. And the same with the emotional work. Things can come up in sessions, and there will be, I don't like to use the word pain. I'm going to say there's going to be a sensation involved. Anytime we're going to grow into a new possibility, we have to feel and see the resistance that's been holding us back. And that's not necessarily a negative thing to be uncomfortable. Sometimes we have to be uncomfortable to grow. So it is important to work with a therapist who can stay present in that uncomfortability to keep you grounded as you move through that, for sure.
Yeah, definitely my experience. There is, maybe to add a little bit more judgment, discomfort that I can experience in moments, but resistance. And yet, from my experience working with you anyway, the trust that I have and desire to continue to open. I take those moments of pain or discomfort as an opportunity. And I always love your feedback when I succeed, just open to it, just allow it. Like, all right, this is not causing more. This is releasing pain, not creating more. Like really trusting that and opening to whatever pressure you're applying or whatever it might be has been, that in itself is healing for me anyway, and just a practice. And I think it adds to how much better I feel at the end of each session, to be honest.
And you may have some feedback on this, but the feedback I've gotten from people is the depth that we work at, or at least I work at, and the releases that can be uncomfortable, the after feels very different than a typical, and I'm not using this to disparage it, but a typical deep tissue massage. So in the past, like I've had a deep tissue massage where somebody is just taking their elbow and they're going as deep as they can because it's a deep tissue massage. And I can feel that my body's resisting, and then the after effects don't feel very good. The feedback I've gotten from people is the strokes can be very intense, but afterwards there's like, the body is like, there's an openness. The body is like, yes, exactly. It's like, oh my God. Yeah, because we're not doing it without intention and thought. Like the release is doing it in a very specific direction, in a very specific depth to work with the body. So afterwards, the body's like, oh my God, yes, that's been holding me back for so long. Thank you for releasing that.
Thank you. Yes.
There's a different quality to a depth stroke within set, or just, very intentional myofascial work versus, just someone sticking their elbow in your back during a deep tissue massage.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Awesome. All right. So landing the plane here, coming in.
Yeah.
Just final thoughts. Someone comes in, they have a first session. What to expect after that? Like how, I know there's a wide range of people who maybe have one session, that's good, but what's the typical, what can you expect for subsequent sessions, sort of the ongoing relationship potentially?
It depends on what the person's coming in with and what their intention is. So if someone's coming in with severe acute pain, those type of people, I'm going to recommend to them that they come in once a week. They're going to come in, pretty routinely until they can maintain no pain consistently for a week or two, and then consistently space them out to a point where they're maintaining that no pain for a month.
Wow. Now, so that's the goal, Tim. I love that as a simple goal. Like how long can you go without experiencing pain? And that's a very trackable data point.
And if someone's coming in more for, let's say, personal optimization, let's say, that's up to them at that point. It depends on, if you're coming in for acute pain, we work very differently than people who are coming in for optimization. Optimization is just, you come in for a session and you tell me what you want at that point. I recommend you come in more frequently in the beginning, just because the unwinding process takes a little bit to kind of get the ball rolling, but you don't have to because you're not in acute pain. But if you're in acute pain, that's where I recommend really commit to doing a few sessions weekly, if not bi-weekly, to get you a point where you're maintaining that so you can live your life without pain. That's my goal to get you to.
Seems like a pretty good place to leave it for now, Tim. Live your life without pain. And it's reminding me of this: pain is inevitable,
Right.
Suffering is optional.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that might be a different, like to the point you're not suffering, right? That's the point we want to get you. We want to limit suffering as much as possible. Physical pain, your back pain might go away, but you're going to get in the car and you're going to have some soreness in your shoulder. Like we can't get rid of all your pain, but we can try and lessen your suffering as much as possible.
Yes, I'm in. I'm all in, Tim. Thank you. So maybe, do you mind reminding folks, is there anything else, by the way? Is there anything we didn't get to that you wanted to today?
I mean, this is, this is probably a whole topic on our day, but there's a whole bunch of other cranial techniques that we can do for people suffering from more cognitive issues. So like, post-concussion issues, migraines, dementia, Alzheimer's, TBIs. And that might have to be another episode down the road of how we explain how that works. But that after we do the core distortion release, now everything's moving in unison, then we can apply specific techniques that essentially clean your brain out to allow your brain to start to heal for all those cognitive issues that can affect people as well. Again, that's probably a whole discussion for another day. But briefly, that for those people as well, there's a lot of benefit to that.
Thank you. Yeah,
Beautiful.
100%. Tim. Sounds great. So remind people, I'm thinking both where they can find you, and even, if you're not here in Connecticut with Tim and I, somewhere close by where you could drive to Portland, Connecticut. So remind us of your website, where to find you, and then maybe if they want to try and connect with another set practitioner.
So my website is sanctuarycenterct.com. I'm located in Portland, Connecticut. They can connect me through my website, or if they're not here, you can go on the main, it's just structuralenergetichtherapy.com. And on that main website, there is a therapist directory, and we're opening up new trainings now to hopefully get more of us out there. But hopefully, wherever you are there, you can find somebody on the main website that's relatively near you to get you some relief.
Great. I'm just making a note. I'll make sure to get that link in the show notes as well as your website, maybe social links. See if we can get you on LinkedIn sometime soon.
I know. I've got to bite the bullet and do the whole, social media thing, which I'm not great at.
Nothing you have to do, my friend. And if it feels like a way to bring more love and healing to the world, maybe it's worth moving through the discomfort. I'm just talking to myself right now.
As we tell people, though, there's only growth and discomfort. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to do it because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, it's feeding into the system. We're always in this, do I work with the system or do I rebel against it? And I'm still on the both train.
I know you have, again, going back to, we have to deal with what is, and at the same time, create the other alternative. I tend to be the person who just wants to not be in the what is. Aversion.
We all, the Buddha said we all have, we all have a lead: greed, hatred, and delusion. We're up in the name for those afflictions, maybe. And so if you're really resistant to things, that kind of thing, it's aversion. I'm definitely an aversive. Like that's my main one. Greed. If you're really coveting, other people's things, you want more, you always want more than you have. That's greed. And I've had a teacher say, I love this: if you're not really sure, if you're unclear which one you are, then you're probably delusion or confusion. That's
I could probably say I am all of them.
Well, we all have all. It's ultimate, like any personality test or anything, the awareness, right? And seeing which one, like I am constantly in resistance to what is, especially for things that are very unimportant.
And maybe if we can leave with this, it's something because it's brought up, is like, people listening to this right now, it's like, I don't want to come off as I know it all. Like,
I don't think you did.
And just know, like, we're all going through these journeys together. And I think what helps me with clients is that I empathize with what they're going through because I'm dealing with it myself at the same time. And I'm not coming from it like, I know where to go. I'm saying, well, I'm kind of walking this way. It seems to be helping. And if you want to come this way, it can help. But I don't know. I'm trying my best too. We're all humans, just trying to be humans at the end of the day and help each other suffer.
We're all just walking each other home, Ram Dass.
Oh, I love that quote song.
Yes. But it's true. And there's this humble confidence is what I'm hearing, Tim. Humble confidence. I'm open and I'm not giving up. And it's a gift that you're offering to everyone that you get to work with. So thank you for who you are and everything you're doing, Tim. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for trying to spread the word as much as possible.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. All right. Talk soon.
Thank you, Peter. Take care.
Right. Well, another big thank you to Tim. And thank you so much for being with us on this conversation on the Fresh Perspectives podcast. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, I'd be so grateful if you're willing to take a moment to subscribe, offer some feedback, and share it with a friend you think they might benefit from listening. Thanks so much for your curiosity. Wishing you courage and compassion. Take care.